Welcome to the Israel Gap Year Be'in podcast. I'm your host, Avi Proctor, and in each episode, we get Be'in in depth into the remarkable lives of individuals in Israel who dedicate themselves to inspiring the next generation of Klal Yisrael. Okay, we are ready to rock and roll. I am pumped for this episode, and hopefully every single person that is clicking on this on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, 24/6, wherever, they have their seat buckles. Yeah, that's a better way to say it. And this is just going to be awesome. And I'm joined right now on Motzei Shabbos with none other than Rabbi Reuven Schrier from Yeshiva Mevaseret. It's been a long time in the making, by the way, for this episode. And a lot of people have been asking me, when are you getting Rabbi Schrier? And now's the time. So just want to say, to start this episode, thank you so much for joining me right now.
Avi, thank you so much. Good vach, and it's something I'm really passionate about, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak about it. So thank you.
And that is also, obviously, people will realize this throughout the episode when we film, that you are very passionate, and it's something that people need to pay attention to throughout this episode, and I think that's very unique about yourself. And just let's jump right into it. So before we talk about today's topic, which obviously is all about modern orthodoxy and kind of what it became today, and so many branches of that topic, I want to delve a little bit into yourself, just so you could give me a little bit of a better understanding, and also those that are listening to this who have never heard anything about Rabbi Schrier. Give us a little bit of background. How did we get here today? And first of all, obviously, you're talking to me from Mishkafayim. So I know you didn't start off living in Israel. How did we get here today? And then we'll go from there.
I'm insulted that you assumed I wasn't born in Israel. How could you tell? But I was...
Your accent is way too good.
Correct. I'm a Woodmere, New York boy. Baruch Hashem, I was raised by wonderful parents in Woodmere, New York. And I went to Halb, DRS. And those institutions were fantastic for me and my brothers. I still talk to this day so enthusiastically about my Rebbeim. Haskalas Gemara, not to exclude anybody, Chas v'Shalom, but the Rabbi Kramers are fantastic Rebbeim. Could not imagine better Rebbeim. Rabbi Kamenetsky Shlita, incredible Rebbe, and still a role model for me to this day. Loved my experience there, was fantastic. Then I went to Yeshiva Har Tzion, the Gush, for a year, not two. I joke with my Talmidim, you could still have ambitions to become a serious Jew, even if you don't get to stay for Shana Bet. And I was going back to YU, so I ended up in YU, and I left, but after a very long time. I must have been there for 11, 12 years. YU's my home. I loved it there. It's my yeshiva. We started raising our family there, and I could just talk about it so much. Try to control myself. I was a chassid of Rav Reuven Schrier for 5 years. I love Rabbi Reuven Schrier and his guidance and the presence that he has in our life as a family. So I was in Rav Reuven Schrier for years, and then I was in Rav Reuven Schrier and Smicha. I was zocheh to learn in the Kollel and by Rav Willig and Rav Schechter, and these are the titans of my life. These are the people who have shaped my life. And my YU experience was fantastic. And I joke, I minored in Rav Karmi. I must have taken 8 classes with Rav Karmi. And that's like 5 Sifrei Tanakh. And I took Maral Rav Hutner and Rav Kook and Theodicy. And there's such Geschmack Torah even in my secular classes that I was taking. And back in those days, especially, Rav Yosef Bronstein Shlito, who now I have the discuss of living down the block from, he was giving we were his guinea pigs for Lubavitcher Rebbe Torah and for Rav Kook, and it was amazing. Those were lunch sessions that he used to give. And Rav Moshe Weinberger Shlita, the Mashpia, he was teaching every week in YU when I was an undergrad there, and that was also incredibly impactful, and that was amazing for me. I also took my secular studies really seriously. I believe in the value of secular education, so I majored in psychology. I did want to become a psychologist. Maybe we can get to that. And in Jewish history, I love Jewish history. So I took a lot of those classes, and all of those things kind of built me into who I am. And then the Iker was Smicha and the Kollel, where I was learning in the Beis Medrash. I got to be a Rebbe at nights for the guys, a night sitter Rebbe in YU, which was also just a overwhelmingly fantastic job. It was so many guys booming Beis Medrash, Baruch Hashem, and taught some of the alumni in the early morning, 5:30 a.m. Those guys are stark. They're amazing. Yeah. And it was an incredible experience, the entire YU experience, and raising our family in Washington Heights, surrounded by the yeshiva, where we were always in the yeshiva. I joke, and it's true, my kids' lollipop men were Rav Cohen Shlita and Rav Schechter Shlita. Those are the people that got lollipops from on Shabbos. So to this day, my kids still call lollipops shahakos, because that's what Rav Cohen says every time he gives it. What is it? Is it a lollipop? It's a shahakol, and he gives it to them. So it was a tremendous class. We loved it there.
That's honestly amazing, and it's funny because I have so many friends of mine that have been learning in YU or have been there when the time that you were there, and the impact that you had was real, and it was significant. And what's so interesting to me when I hear of somebody like you who was in America doing your thing, you obviously were impacting people, and you had a real role in what you were doing at YU, and then obviously we're talking today, and you're not living in America. Take me through that. What was that decision like? How did you get to Israel, and why did you ultimately leave to move here?
It's quite a story. Let's start with when I first got engaged. So, Nashim Mechaber Minas Haaretz, my wife was always ahead of the game when it came to moving to Eretz Yisrael. And when we were dating, we spoke about the possibility of doing it. Now, our Rebbeim's derech always was, and this is where we got from all of our Rebbeim, that you have to use the kochos HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to do. And if it could be in Eretz Yisrael, amazing. But you don't sacrifice the ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what He intends for you, or the best of your knowledge. We have no Nevi'im now, but the best of your knowledge, what you think HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to be doing, to move to Eretz Yisrael. So we were hoping that we'd be able to make it work. And I still remember we were engaged and we were in Eretz Yisrael for the summer. I was on Entis Kola, my wife was Entis Mechlalet. And our off day, we went to Nefesh B'Nefesh's headquarters, and we're these almost newlyweds, and we're so excited, and we come in for a meeting with them to talk about our aspirations to make Aliyah. It was the most depressing meeting I've ever had. Nothing convinced me more that I could not make an Eretz Yisrael than that meeting. Nothing. The woman is sitting there, and I understand why. She's trying to make sure that we're being responsible and not starry-eyed and just taking the jump without, that's Nefesh B'Nefesh's job, to make sure that it's responsible. And we're describing what we do, and I still wanted to do psychology and chinuch, and my wife was talking about chinuch, and she's like, so who wants to do high-tech here? Look at my, like, none of us said that. I don't know where you got that from. She's basically trying to make sure that we're a little more responsible. And she basically told us that I don't think it's necessarily so responsible to make Aliyah. So we came back, we were a little dejected, and we kind of bought that, and we kind of resigned ourselves to living in Chutz La'aretz. And that was when I was in YU for many years, and we were actually going to move to Fairlawn, New Jersey. We bought a house in Fairlawn, New Jersey, at the end of my stint in the Kol Elyon in YU. And I was going to be teaching Torah in Darchei Noam by Rabbi Jeremy Doneth Shlita, and he's wonderful. And we were going to be working with them in the shul there. And it was specifically that year, literally right after we bought the house, me and Mama just put down the offer, and it was accepted. And we were going through all the protocols, and all of a sudden, people reached out with potential opportunities in Eretz Yisrael. And I remember vividly when my wife asked me when we were dating, do you think you could be a Rebbe in yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael? I said, no way, it's not going to happen. And then all of a sudden now, these offers kind of came out of nowhere, and we started doing a lot of Cheshbon HaNefesh. And that summer, we went back to Eretz Yisrael for Entis Mechalot. We always go to Mechalot every single summer. And we were on the phone with our contemporaries in Eretz Yisrael and Rebbeim in Eretz Yisrael. That was till like 10 o'clock at night. And then the shift for the American rabbis and American people that we had to discuss started, and we were going to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning every single night. It was a lot of talking out, trying to plan out chinuch options in Eretz Yisrael, which was the biggest consideration for us. Communities, what's the best place for my children to learn and grow and to obviously get accommodated to Israeli society, and we were trying to figure that out. But I was a little weak on it. I was, especially what you said, I had these aspirations of what I was going to accomplish in America, and I had these let's just call it what it is, arrogant aspirations in terms of what I think I could accomplish. And I still remember vividly, we were in Reshit for the summer. That's where Mechalot always is, at the schluss of living in the Avi apartment right across from Rav J. Zatzal. And the Rebbitzin, she should be well. And Rav J was an incredible person, so incredible. And we davened in the shul, Ol Yonah Menachem, down the block from Reshit. Rabbi Meir Lichtenstein is the Rav there. And obviously, he's Rav Lichtenstein's son, Rav Aaron Zatzal's son, and Rav Aaron was the Titan Baruch Hashem of Zochad that when I was in Gush, Rav Aaron was still giving shiurim and was still speaking to us, and huge spiritual impact on our family. So I always loved listening to Rav Meir Darshan. So I came in for that particular Shabbos. It was Matos Maseh. He gets up to the pulpit and he starts with this introduction. This is the 50th year anniversary of my parents making Aliyah. And he said those words, and I knew I was going to get eviscerated in this drasha. He was going to destroy me. He starts going about his father's motivations for Aliyah, and that he left behind everything, and he didn't care about the physical pleasantries of Chutz La'aretz. He didn't care about the kavod of Chutz La'aretz. He didn't care about any of those things. And he made Aliyah, and I'm sitting in the crowd. And I'll be honest, intellectually, none of the points were striking, because I know that if his grandfather, the Rav, was standing there, he would disagree with every point that he was making. Obviously, the Rav was not necessarily a fan of Rav Aaron's Aliyah, but but he poked a hole in my balloon of my crazy aspirations of what I would accomplish, especially contrasting with Rav Chatzin Zatzal. And it was a stark reminder. Rav Shechter Shlita always says that the graveyards of Chutz La'aretz are filled with people who thought they were indispensable. And that for me was it was a powerful moment. I came back, and again, my wife was always ahead of the game on this, and I said, I think we got to really look into this and consider it. It was not a simple path. For anybody who knows how I got there, the way I got to Mivaseret was a pinball machine, and then Baruch Hashem, I can't say how much. I always used to say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, people used to ask me, where are you going to end up? And I would say, wherever HaKadosh Baruch Hu throws me, I just hope it's a soft landing. And it was quite a zigzag there. Ended up in Mivaseret. I love Mivaseret. It's lechatchila sheblechatchila. I always say, I love who I'm working for, who I'm working with. I love the Talmidim I'm working with. It's just a check, and it's an incredible schus to be there. And Baruch Hashem, my children are happy and they're thriving in this country. My wife is happy. It's a big, tremendous bracha and schus. Especially, I imagine, and my wife and I do this all the time, what we would be going through if we gave up on this opportunity and we were in Chutz La'aretz for the last 2 years, not with Klal Yisrael at this time. I don't even know how I would emotionally cope, to be honest. So it's a tremendous bracha and schus to be here.
It is a tremendous bracha and schus to, by the way, have you as a neighbor, even though we don't see each other enough in Ramat Beit Shemesh. And I do have to see you more in Mishkapayim. It is. What do you say?
I could see your apartment from where I am, but it's two totally different neighborhoods. It's like a 25-minute walk. Come on.
Exactly. So maybe I have to stop by and say hi in person for once. But I really love, obviously, a lot of your journey, and it's that story that you just mentioned about being in that shul and that Shabbos and hearing that drasha. I guess Hashem has his way of giving his messages over to Jews at the times exactly when they need it. And I think that's basically exactly what happened to you from your journey and that process of you coming here. And as you just alluded to at the end of your story there for a second, you just said the past 2 years have been crazy in Israel, and not living here, you probably would not have felt, you wouldn't have felt the same way that you do now. And obviously, and just knowing you personally a little bit, I know you had a little bit of a stint in Shlab Bet in the army. So before we get into the topic for today, I want you to touch on that a little bit. What was that like for you? Did you have any pushback of people saying, join the army, question, not whatever? Take me through that a little bit.
Yeah, Shlab Bet it's fascinating. For people who don't know, Shlab Bet is a program that the army started for Charedim who had maxed out of army service, I think above the age of 27. And they offered it to Olim. It used to be open to Olim. They wouldn't check into your hashkafic background too much when it was Oleh. And was not something that I thought about at all. I don't even know if I knew about it. And then Rav Chesky Glat Shlita, he's one of my dear Chaverim. I consider him a role model. He's really somebody I look up to in many ways. And I remember vividly getting a picture of him in Madin. It was like, I was shocked. He did this Shlab Bet program and he's in the army. And once Rav Chesky did it, I had to look at myself in the mirror and say, if he's doing it, I have to think of it. And then I said to myself, no, Chesky's better than me in every way. He's a meshugana for MS. That's Chesky. That's not for me. And I kind of put it away a little bit. I will admit that I looked up an article by Rav Aaron White, one of our other good friends, who did Shlab Bet, and he wrote an article about it. And that's why people reach out to him about this. So I reached out to him, but I definitely wasn't convinced. Let's put it that way. And then what really pushed me over was I had a conversation with my Rebbeim, obviously Rav Daniel Schreiber, Shlita from Yeshiva Har Tzion. He's one of my close Rebbeim, and my Rebbeim from America, obviously, and Rav Rosenzweig and Rav Torsky and Rav Eisenstein Shlita, my Shul Rav here, and it was starting to percolate a little more. And then I got a notice where I saw that there was a unit called Egen Machatz. It's a Chaver Kadisha unit that works in the north, and especially when the situation was heating up with Hezbollah in the north, they were looking for more people to join. They don't have enough people to do it. And I'm told I don't have the stomach for it. It's quite a job from what I'm told. But I said to myself, if Kedoshei Elyon don't have enough people to take care of them, I can't just stand here, and I need to do this. And that's kind of what pushed me over. And I signed up and waited 10 months for Tzal to get back to me. That's the way the bureaucracy works, especially these last 2 years. I don't think we were their top priority during the Iran war for some reason. I think they had other things that they were dealing with, but it did take a bunch of months right after the Iran war. That's when they basically reached out. After many of my Israeli colleagues yelling at them over the phone, and I did it right before the Zman. And it's 2 weeks of basic training, and you qualify for non-combat roles. It's O2 training for non-Karavi, and people don't realize that there are lots of roles non-combat that are necessary for our Gibori Koach to be on the front lines and to be well taken care of. So those are all very, very important jobs. Actually, I was placed into a different unit. I'm in the process of getting switched to Eged Machatz, which army bureaucracy that also apparently takes a very long time. My contact at Eged Machatz says, yeah, and you're in the middle of being switched. It's been a couple months. He says, it's not a big deal. It's going to happen. So hopefully I'll find out what that entails soon. But that's what I was planning on doing, and hopefully it'll come to fruition soon. I think one thing that's important to say is a lot of people were asking me almost explicitly. I think there was almost an expectation, oh, it must have been so inspiring. And I said, actually, no, it wasn't a romantic experience. It wasn't inspiring. I just think it's really important. Like, I didn't enjoy it. I just think we should. I just think it was really important to do. And I think it's important to emphasize that a lot of times people almost act as if the only reason to do it is because it's romantic and because it's inspiring and because it's and I don't think that should be the reason why we're doing it. And I think it just was important for me to do. And Baruch Hashem, I got very good eitzah and I have very good friends, and that's how it happened.
It's a great point, and I'm glad that you're pointing that part out. That like a lot of people think like, oh, I'm going to do it because yeah, it's inspiring. But sometimes you got to do the dirty work when it's not that that story. And obviously, shout out to Rabbi Glatt. Good, he is one of my Rebbeim from yeshiva, and he's very inspiring. So the fact that he inspired you, as you mentioned, very special. And there is ain't kamo Rabbi Glatt. So
he inspires me in many ways, not just this one. Yeah.
Exactly. I love your background, and I hope people now get a better understanding of who you are as we jump into the topic for today, which is the topic of modern Orthodoxy. And there's so many different branches of this that we're going to discuss over the next little bit. But I want to start off where I think the root of a lot of these things are. For the majority of the people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis, they are students in Mivaseret. You obviously talk to students in many different yeshiva and seminaries. And the large majority of these students are coming from what you would call a conventional, in quotations, Modox, modern Orthodox family in America or the diaspora or wherever. And these students oftentimes grow up in these households. They come to Israel, and then all of a sudden they make this crazy shift and go like in this complete opposite way. And then all of a sudden the kid gets back off the plane, and then the parents are thinking like, what just happened to my kid? The family friend from across the street, and everyone's like, what is going on? So I want to start off that idea with you. Like, where do you think that's coming from?
So obviously this is something I'm really passionate about and think a lot about. And I want to take it step by step, but I want to start with a very, very annoying qualification. I think it's a really important one. It's annoying, but it's important. Even the words modern Orthodoxy, to me, I don't like using those words. My Rebbeim don't like using those words. The Rav never used those words. In fact, Rav Tursky Shlita noted that the only time that the Rav, to his knowledge, used the term modern Orthodoxy was to denigrate it, to talk negatively about it, that it relates to a worldview in which all of your hopes and aspirations and plans and dreams are based off of modern society, secular society, as opposed to what the Rav viewed his own world vision, which is informed by Ratzon Hashem and Torah and the Da'am Shal Halacha and the Vayos Habayit Derava. So I think it's important to recognize that when I'm talking about my values, and I even say my community, I'm talking about the Rav Talmidav, Yeshivas Ben Yitzchak Chanan, and that's what I'm describing in terms of my Rebbeim and their vision and their hashkafic path and what they envision for the community that is following them. So that's what I'm describing. And I think it's important to qualify, and we'll talk about more details about that as we go on. And
I just want to cut you off. Sorry to interject, and I typically never do this. For somebody that doesn't know what the Rav means and what Rav, Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak HaChanan is, give people just a quick understanding.
Just to clarify, Yeshivas Ben Yitzchak HaChanan is the yeshiva of University. That's the yeshiva that goes all the way back to the late 1800s already, and that was the place where the Rav taught Torah. Rav Moshe Soloveitchik taught Torah. It's the Rav taught Torah. That's where all of his Talmidim are, and that's the air of our community. YU, and especially the yeshiva, the Beis Medrash, is the air that our community breathes. So that's what I'm describing when I talk about our community, and that's the vision that my Rebbeim have, and that's what I'm trying to give across. I think there's another important qualification before we jump into this. This is obviously a very sensitive topic, as you said. Sometimes parents are really frustrated, and the neighbors and everybody's looking at this kid. What happened? I think there are three different reactions we can have to a conversation like this. One, we can either deny it, and we can put our heads in the sand and deny the facts on the ground, or another iteration, say other communities have the same issues and it's really in the other places too. That's one reaction that we can have. Reaction number two is that we can point fingers at institutions and at Rebbeim and seminary teachers. It's their fault. I think number three, which I think is the most productive response and what I'm going to push for is to look in a mirror and ask ourselves, what's the best that we can do to strengthen our community, make our community more, strengthen its core, make it a more powerful place for our children to be raised and a more powerful place for our children to see as enticing to rejoin when they come back from Eretz Yisrael, or even when they go to Eretz Yisrael, to view themselves as deeply connected to that Masorah. And the other two might be true. 1 and 2 could very possibly be true, but that's not productive. And I think what's more productive is to look into a mirror. So what I'm going to be, a phrase I'm probably going to use a lot tonight is, so if we look in a mirror, and I'm going to say it a lot because I think we should be doing self-retrospection instead of looking outwardly and pointing fingers or denying the reality on the ground. So those are my first 2 qualifications. Let's jump straight into it. It's a fantastic question that deserves a long answer, and you'll cut me off if I go overboard. Let's start. I have this course of teaching Mivaseret, obviously, but more importantly for this conversation, I also teach NCSY Kolos. That's high schoolers from across America and other countries sometimes. And YU was even more important because in YU I was dealing with guys from across the spectrum in terms of community, high schools that they went to, yeshivas that they went to, shiurim and YU that they're in, really across the spectrum in terms of capability and everything. And that was one of the beautiful things about my job in YU, is that I was dealing with all of these guys, wonderful guys. And there is a sad shaveh, a common denominator in almost every conversation that I had with guys when asking about the values of our community. I used to ask, what are the values of our community? What do you think the values of our community are? And inevitably, the answer usually first is social media and technology, TV and movies, following professional sports, and I don't know, a couple of other things along those lines in terms of that's what's being emphasized. The best one is when you get, no, we're Orthodox but light. We're like light Judaism. We're chill. That's also something that sometimes comes across in those conversations. Now, there are some Talmidim who are sophisticated enough to realize that that's a really bad answer to that question. So they'll say things like being engaged with the world, but what they mean, they might mean other things too, but what they mean, bi'ikaron, is the things that we just mentioned, and that's what they associate with our community's hashkafa. That is a really sad reality. It's a busha. It's an embarrassment. Let's just take this step by step. Let's just first start with the things that were put under the umbrella of the Rav's hashkafa, of our community's hashkafa, that really don't belong there. Social media. Let's put it this way. One thing that really does make you a follower of the Rav is appreciating secular wisdom and utilizing secular wisdom. And if you look at the research and you look at what every single reputable institution and the research that comes out of them are saying about social media, these devices and platforms are horrifically terrible for our children. Horrible social emotional health and the schmutz and all the things that are involved with what it takes for a 13-year-old who has a device like this. It's terrible. To the point where you have my favorite researcher, Jonathan Haidt, who's an atheist. He happens to be a Yid, but he's an atheist. And he's saying that we shouldn't be giving devices to our children before the age of 18. So I think that's what the secular wisdom tells us. I think it makes a lot of sense. So we have to ask ourselves, what's going on if our children are associating core values of our community with the use of TikTok? And what does that mean about the messages that they're being given over, or at least that they're perceiving? Irrelevant of what the parents think they're giving over, this is what kids are perceiving about what our communal values are about. And that's really bad. It's a lot to think about. And that's starting to be, let's call it, kids are starting to combine that with the values of being engaged with the world, with the value of being osik b'yeshuva shalom, which is what the Rav did preach, of being engaged with the world and contributing to the world and looking into secular chachma and realizing that it has value. And that's starting to be intertwined with TikTok, which is a scourge on society. Let's go through a couple of television and movies. I love this one. Let's put it this way. When Rav Hirsch Zatzal was describing his own hashkafa, which is not the same as the Rav's, but his own hashkafa of Torah and Derech Eretz in Germany, in Frankfurt, what was he describing in terms of a Jew that's deeply rooted in Torah, deeply engaged with Torah and the Masorah, but also engages with secular society and draws from secular culture? That's what Rav Hirsch was describing. He was talking about people who read Schiller and listened to Beethoven, like quality literature and symphonies and culture. What do our children get exposed to when it comes to television and movies nowadays? They're exposed to the gutter. It's the sewage of modern society. There's nothing edifying about it. There's nothing that makes me into a better person. There's nothing that uplifts and elevates the human spirit through the vast majority of what our kids and frankly what we are watching and really spending a lot of time doing. And I like to tell this story. My wife taught in a high school in America, and she used to always share with her students an article written by Rabbi Yitzhak, who very much associates with the hashkafa of our community. And I think the title was something to the effect of "I'm Modern Orthodox and Why I Don't Have a TV," something to that effect of why he doesn't have a TV. And he goes off listing many very compelling reasons, Lefianis Daiti, as to why just because you believe in a hashkafa that embraces secular wisdom and being engaged with the world does not justify the waste of time and all the other things that he delineates there, and there are much worse things that he delineates there, of what TV does. And when my wife would share it with her students, they treat it as if it was yeshivish kfira, like how could you say such a thing? And they associate it with a different community. They associate these values, I can't call it a value, they associate the dregs of modern society, consuming sewage, essentially, especially for the neshama, something that doesn't ennoble the human spirit at all, as our values. And that's the way they associate it. And what I'm getting at is that when a kid turns around and he decides that he doesn't want his children to have social media because he understands the research and he understands how terrible it is for his children. And when a young woman turns around and decides that I don't want my children wasting hours watching this garbage, and I don't want it to be that in my household there's social pressure for my children to have to keep up and watching the latest Netflix series that's really bad for my children's neshamos, which is something that we should all agree on. And what do you expect of them? What do you expect of them? Where are they supposed to go? And they're struggling and they don't know what to do. Can you blame them when they don't see our community, Rahman al-Tzlan, because they perceive our community as inherently associated with these things? It's something that we have to look in the mirror about and ask ourselves. Let's talk about avid following of professional sports. I'm not talking about watching games every once in a while. Talk to your personal Rav, and everybody's on a different path. And it's ridiculous for me to assume that somebody who especially people who fought for their frumkeit and they enjoy watching baseball, that's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is the avid obsession with sports, professional sports. I'm a big fan of playing sports. I think it's a very healthy outlet for my Talmidim. It's fantastic. Obviously, Avi, you're fantastic at that also in terms of facilitating that. But the avid obsession and the fact that we have posters of them on our walls and that's what we talk about at the Shabbos table, and that's what kids are interested in, the statistics. I love my Talmidim are so holding statistics when it comes to Shakavataria and Bava Metzia, not as much. And let me quote a story from Rav Lichtenstein that I think pulls this guy. There's a quote from Rav Lichtenstein. I remember reading a quote when I was younger, and Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal wrote, he's talking about our community. He's talking about how instead of actually imbibing secular wisdom, we're kind of imbibing other things that have no value for a Yiddish neshama and for somebody who's striving to be an Eved Hashem. And he associates that with sports and pop culture and pop music and those things. And his line is, our children know nothing about Rav Nachum Zemba, but they know all of the life statistics of Michael Jordan and even worse, Michael Jackson. That was the line. And I remember reading that. It's quite a sharp line. I remember reading that and I said, who on earth is Rav Nachum Zemba? I had no clue who Rav Nachum Zemba was. The titan of pre-war Europe and the hero of the Warsaw Ghetto. No clue who he was. And what Rav Lichtenstein was noting is that, come on, this is engaging with secular wisdom. This is engaging with things that aid in Eved Hashem. Worshipping sports players doesn't do any of it. These personalities are people who contribute kimat nothing. These sports players and pop stars kimat offer nothing for an ennobled, sophisticated person, let alone a Yiddish neshama. And we're talking about them with more enthusiasm than we talk about anybody. Our tzaddikim, our Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbanu Shalom, Elisha Lowenstern, Zatzal Hashem Yikom Damo. And that's what our kids are starting to associate our community with, in which we're more enthusiastic about sports players and pop stars than we are about religious values and Yiddishkeit and people who excel at those things. And again, when a kid turns around and decides that these things, the Chashmonayim were fighting against the introduction of sports into Yerushalayim Mir Kodesh, and that the worship of the human body and everything that entails, and worshiping people who offer nothing to an ennobled human spirit, and they realize that that's not something that they want for their own children, and they don't want their kids to be putting up pictures of sports players on their walls. If they associate that with our community, what do you want the kid to do? What is the kid supposed to do? Let me talk about the most important one. This is the one that I think is really key, in which I've literally heard this formulation before. People will say things like, we're Orthodox but chill. We're halakha light. We're not as crazy, and we don't do everything in the same way. And it's so important to make this emphatically clear, and there's nothing to discuss here. Following the Rav's hashkafa does not mean that we ignore a single kutzah shayud of Shulchan Aruch. And it's so, so crucial for us to realize that our sole compass in life is based in Torah and Ratzon Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his Torah is what determines everything that we should be doing in life. Now, the Rav's interpretation of Ratzon Hashem and the way that he applied it was certainly broader than many of his contemporaries. But Lamaisa, everything should be coming from what the Torah has to say, and Shulchan Aruch is the platform for Ratzon Hashem in this world. We don't compromise a single thing on the Taryag Mitzvahs, on the Yoga Mikarei Emunah, and the halachic process that led to where we are today. We don't compromise on that whatsoever. I love it. People like to call me Wayu Machmir. I get the phrase Wayu Machmir a lot. What does Wayu Machmir even mean? What does it mean that I'm Wayu Machmir? I joke. I'm Machmir in the context of the Wayu Rosh Yeshiva, so I don't drink milk like Rav Schechter. What does it mean that I'm Machmir? It's so important to clarify. Being Machmir on keeping Shulchan Aruch is not being Machmir. It's called keeping halacha. That is what it means to be a frum Torah Jew. We can struggle with keeping Shulchan Aruch. That's okay to have a struggle, but it's not a hashkafa. Our hashkafa and the hashkafa of the Rav is that we don't compromise on anything just because modern society and secular society dictates that something should or should not be happening. In fact, in this context, the Rav used to refer to secular society as a neurotic society. We don't listen to what they have to say. Torah is our internal compass. Our Masorah is our internal compass. Ratzon Hashem is everything. And yes, we are willing to look at what the outside world has to offer, and the Rav in many cases took from what the outside world has to offer. But pashut, that everything stems from our Masorah, and the halachic processes that come down to us from this day, we're not chill. We're not chill. We're very serious. we don't take Orthodoxy chill. We don't take halacha chill. We believe that Shulchan Aruch is the platform for Ratzon Hashem in this world. It's worse than that. It's not just that kids associate our community with those things, and therefore when they are spiritually on fire and when they're feeling halachically ambitious, they don't view our community as a destination. We're interweaving our real values with these things. So our real values of being osek v'yeshuva sha'olam and engaging with this world, and parnasa zalechatchila, and the value of secular chachma is being intertwined with the dregs of modern society and sewage that our kids are consuming on TikTok and in TV and Netflix specials. Now our kids associate those things together. Now our values of Medinas Yisrael and Rachmana Litzlan, the sacrifice of a chayal for Klal Yisrael, and the value of tzava is being intertwined with, we don't take Torah so seriously. We're loosey-goosey with halacha. We're not as makbid on halacha. So the community that's more makbid on halacha, that's why they don't believe in the army. And as soon as a kid becomes interested in Torah, becomes interested in halacha, and realizes that Ratzon Hashem should be the only thing that interests him in life, out goes Zionism. Zionism is gone, out the window. Because he associates that with people who are not serious about Talmud Torah, who are not serious about halacha. It's such a chilul Hashem. It's such a tremendous, it kills me. I feel like I'm doing brain surgery sometimes trying to explain to kids, like, no, these values are Kodesh Kodashim, these values are our Masorah, and the other things are not. They've been incorporated along the way, but they certainly are not what the Rav envisioned and not what the Rav described, and not what his Talmidim describe. It really breaks my heart and it really kills me. And I think we have to be looking in the mirror and doing a better job recognizing that if our kids are associating our hashkafa and our fundamental core values with these things, what are we going to do about it? Again, we can point fingers and we can say it's not true. This is the metzias of how kids associate with the values of our community.
I like a lot of the points that you said, and I have a very interesting follow-up to that, but I want to touch on a few things which I think is very interesting, is that being the whole Wayu Machmer thing that you said, it's that you're not compromising on halacha. I mean, you're following halacha, and what does that actually mean to be Wayu Machmer? I mean, you're Shomer Torah Mitzvos. And another thing that I just was basically the last thing you said was how you have students that as soon as they hear the word Zionism, they associate it back to what was there before, all the schmutz, all the stuff, and then they connect it, and then they're like, oh, I can't be that when I become frum, so therefore I'm just going to completely get rid of that, which it's a whole nother sheer in and of itself. But my follow-up to you is, okay, with all the things that you just discussed, and I love, by the way, how you broke everything down into categories, modern orthodoxy today is what it is, right? But if you take it back to the beginning of this conversation, which was it stems from somewhere. It stems from the Rav. So if you have modern orthodoxy and you have the Rav on one side, and then obviously you have, fast forward 50, 60, 70 years later, where it is today, where's that link? How did it get to where it is today? And how did we get to the definition of modern orthodoxy today if that's not what it originally started at?
I'm so glad you're asking this question. I get this question all the time. And to be honest, I think it's based on a major misunderstanding of American history, American Jewish history. And that's why I'm so glad that you're saying it. This is a question I get all the time. Let's jump back to when the Rav first got to America. We're talking about America, let's say, before the Rav, when Moshe was already here, his father, 20s, 30s, 40s. We're talking about millions of Jews running from Europe, in many cases from pogroms, v'chulei, coming to America, and total spiritual holocaust. I'm sorry to say it that way. Just take my Zaidi as an example. My Zaidi came from Russia, 1 out of 7, the only one that's from. I don't even know how many siblings he had, to be honest, because of how far off the family has gone over the course of the years. And you could talk about the most chashuv rabbinic families that came from Hungary. I'm thinking of one in particular, in which kemat, all of the kids were not from within a generation. That was the mitzius that the Rav was dealing with. And if you were a betting man, as everybody says, everybody was betting on Orthodoxy was going to die not slow, a very quick, painful death. That was what was going to happen. The conservative movement was going to consume it, and Orthodoxy was a thing of the past. It wasn't going to happen. It was barbaric and antiquated. And a bunch of heroes stood up. The Rav, his contemporaries, I'm not trying to ignore anybody, chas v'shalom, and leave anybody off the list, but yeshivas like Torah Vodaas and Chaim Berlin and Eretz Yisrael and BMG, and obviously the Lubavitcher Rebbe Zatzal, there were heroes who stood up and they fought a milchama against those who said that Orthodoxy was a thing of the past, and they showed that Torah could truly take root in the soil of America. And in a milchama, everybody plays their own individual roles, and obviously, for me, the ultimate hero was Rav Soloveitchik in terms of the milchama he fought. We're talking about mechitzos crashing across America. And the Rav's Talmidim went out, those loyal cadre of Talmidim, and they held the line. And sometimes they pulled shuls back from the brink and back into Orthodoxy. And the mechitzos stayed up or were put up. And the levels of Shmiras Halacha were going up. We're talking about a tekufa in which shul dinners, there were mixed dancing. We're talking about where Taras HaMishpacha was viewed as like a disgusting thing that doesn't make any sense. And kashrus was far harder to keep. And the Rav's Talmidim held that line and slowly but surely began to win that milchama. Lo and behold, in the 80s and 90s, by the time we get there, v'nahafachu, everybody now recognizes that Orthodoxy is ascendant, and Rachmana litzlan, the conservative movement, shedding the shamos back left and right, to the point where Rabbi Reuven Schrier likes to always say, it's obvious to anybody nowadays that if you would drop the name Orthodoxy, within one generation, you're gone. Which is why nobody will drop the name Orthodoxy anymore, because it's so obvious that the success of the Rav's contemporaries is so clear, you can't abandon them. You can't abandon at least the name of Orthodoxy, even if you're not being so loyal, let's say, to any of their Masoras. Still, you refuse to drop the label because you understand what it means for your children and the generations that follow, if you do. So it's not like the Rav created the modern Orthodox community. There were tens of thousands of people that he saved from sliding into the conservative movement, and people that the institutions that were created were sometimes staffed by his students and sometimes following his opinions. But it's not like everybody just said and said, hey, Rabbi Soloveitchik, what do you think about the tafkid of my life? What should I be doing with my life? And what should my aspirations and ambitions be? And what should I be doing with my children? They were not interested in hearing a lot of the things that Rabbi Soloveitchik had to say about so many different topics. Now, he was a charismatic titan. He was otherworldly, which is the reason why even secular people respected him endlessly. And that's why he was successful in this milchama. But it's not like people were actually listening to him and actually asking him what he thought about many of these different issues. And I think I could say it this way, Rav Rosenstock Zatzal, Rav Rosenstock's father, would like to say that he remarked very sarcastically to Rav Rosenstock when he came back from the RCA convention after the Rav was nifter. He said, oh, it's so funny, now everybody's saying, if only we had the Rav, if only we had the Rav, if only then we would have clarity on all these different issues. And Rav Berel said, it's funny, they didn't care about what he said when he was alive. Now that he's dead, after they die, now they're holy. Now all of a sudden we care so much about what they have to say. It's a word of the Noam Elimelech that I love so much. Noam Elimelech in Lezhensk, he says that the Gemara Chulin says, Chavivim tzadikim b'misasam yosem b'chayim. That tzadikim are more appreciated in their life than they are in their death, than they are in their life. So the Pashut Pshat in the Gemara there is that after tzadikim die, Kadosh Baruch Hu treats their zchuyos even more. Chavivim tzadikim b'misasam. The Rebbe Ramelech used to quip. He says, yeah, it's Chavivim Tzadikim b'misasam. Once they're dead, now everybody appreciates them. Now they're Gadlos and the Tzadik and the Manig, and he was so Kadosh and Torah, v'chulei. When he was alive, no, he's in his ivory tower, he doesn't get it, he doesn't understand the Metzias on the ground. And I feel like there's a lot of Chavivim Tzadikim b'misasam when it comes to this. And it's not necessarily true that our community was always following the Rav. It wasn't created by him, the institutions weren't built by him, weren't necessarily even built sometimes by his Talmidim, and this is the Metzias. And I don't blame the institutions. In many cases, the institutions are dealing with the Metzias on the ground of a parent body. They can't take a quantum leap without the parent body that they're trying to service, and I totally understand that. But we have to realize that that's a reality. Let me just qualify. This is really important. I say this to my Talmidim all the time. Their parents, and certainly their grandparents, are much holier than me and much holier than them. The sacrifices that their grandparents had to make, their grandparents were taking the sacrifice, what it meant to keep Shabbos in the 50s and 60s, kashrus, taras mishpacha. People called them barbaric and antiquated, and they willingly gave themselves over into Orthodox institutions and paid tons of money to build those institutions. I stand on the shoulders of giants. They made me into who I am. Their institutions they built made me into who I am. This is not about skar b'olam haba. I will not be surprised that I got to the Shemayim Achamei ve'esrim, and my parents and my grandparents are well beyond anything that I achieved in this world. I would have a problem with that, but I don't have a problem with that. It makes total sense that with everything they had to sacrifice in order to achieve what they achieved, far outshines everything that I've done. But this is what my brother likes to always say. It's a very sharp point that he makes to his congregants all the time. My brother likes to say, it's funny, when it comes to everything.
By the way, I'm just going to interject. I'm just interjecting for those that don't know who your brother is. Just tell people.
Rabbi Elliot Schrier. He's a Rav in Bnei Yeshurun in Teaneck. He's fantastic. He's amazing. I view him as one of my Rebbeim. He's incredible. So he likes to always say to his congregants, it's funny, as parents, we always want our kids to outshine us in every single area. We want them to be healthier socially, emotionally. We want them to be physically healthier. We want them to be taller. We want them to be wealthier. We want them to have a better jump shot than us. When it comes to everything, we want them to be happier. We want them to just have a better life, except for when it comes to Frumkeit and Yiddishkeit. There, they have to be exactly the same as us. Chas v'shalom, that when it comes to the most important thing in life, which is Ratzon Hashem, for them to change and to... We have to realize we could view it exactly the opposite. You have sacrificed so much to get your kids to where they got to, and now they can further build, not reject the foundations that you built, not Rahman San turn their back on your values. The opposite, progress, to build, to make the values even sharper and better, and to bring them into a whole new level of what it means to be a Yireh Shamayim and an Eved Hashem who follows in the derech of Rav Soloveitchik. And I think our Talmidim have to realize that they're built on the shoulders of those giants. And I think it's important for parents to reframe how they view their kids starting to get bigger and better as Jews. And I think we should view it as moving forward as opposed to a rejection.
That was really well said, and just a few things which I like the word that you gave about Acharei Mos Kadoshim, but it's interesting because when the Rav was alive, as you were saying before, like people in today's generation don't necessarily know what it was like, to live at the time of the Rav, and we would assume, when he was alive, everyone appreciated everything that he said, but that wasn't necessarily the case, and then obviously all the more so once they pass away, which I think was a very interesting point that you added in over there that I honestly didn't even know. And then another important thing that you highlighted, which was we have to acknowledge the fact that we are not here today, obviously, with the people from the previous generations before us. They built up so much. We are here, because of them, and they had to sacrifice so much. And to add to that point, which was also really good that you said, is that as your brother, quoting your brother, that why do parents, want their child to exceed in sports, in studies, in basically every other category, with exception to the Avodas Hashem? It's a very interesting, question. And honestly, I should probably have your brother on this podcast to talk about that with me as a Rav of an American shul. But it's a very interesting point. And the most important part of that is that you want them to further everything. And my question, based off of specifically that last point that you said, is okay, if we're discussing at this point of the conversation the background of modern Orthodoxy, how we got here today, talking about that chain of from when it started from the Rav to when it got to where it is today, my thought is, okay, if you have parents living the way that they are within the modern Orthodox, framework, and now we're discussing the potential issues or the actual issues that are in our community, hence people have to understand I'm saying the word our, because we're obviously insiders in this one too. We're not critics, we're insiders. Do parents have to begin to reevaluate everything that they're essentially living by or doing?
It's such a painful question because, again, there's so many people, they're Bali Tshuva, and they turn their back on their family, and they sacrifice so much to become frum, and then the kids come home from school saying that they don't keep Shabbos. It's such a painful chapter in a parent's life. I can only imagine, and that's why we have to be so careful. I don't think parents have to make quantum leaps. I think all of Avodah Hashem is always la'at, slow. I do think there are small steps that we could be taking to making our community into a better reflection of what our Rosh Yeshiva say our community should be striving for, and how to make our homes in which our kids view our community as a destination. Let's start with something small. We were talking about Shabbos table talk before, and when we talk enthusiasm about sports players and pop stars and Elon Musk and all these things that we talk about with so much enthusiasm, we could start with just trying to emphasize the values that we want our kids to have internal to our community. So when you start this talking about Rabbi Nachum Zemba, Zatzal, and you start talking about the Rav Soloveitchik and the YU Rosh Yeshiva with passion, when you talk about your shul Rav, instead of speaking Lashon Hara about his shul drasha, you talk very enthusiastically about the shul Rav, and you want to make sure that your children respect him, because he is internal to our community as a tzura of what it means to be a ben Torah. And when you describe that person, that Baal Bas in your shul, who's erlich, honest, integrity, and look at his interpersonal skills and his midos and the way that he deals with other people and his sensitivities, and he's giving that shir, and he's such a Talmid Chacham, and you see he's dominating Avodas Hashem, and he's a successful businessman, v'chulei, or even if he's not a successful businessman for that matter, and you point a picture for your kids of what it means to be a successful Eved Hashem in our community. And those are the things that your kids know you get most enthusiastic about. Not about Aaron Judge, not about LeBron James, not about whatever random pop star happened to put out a song. You're most passionate about this, and this is what you think is most beautiful about our community. That's a smashing success. You're doing an incredible job of painting a picture, a tzura of what it means to be internal to our community and be a person who's halachically ambitious, spiritually on fire, dedicated to Ratzon Hashem, and engaged with the world, making a parnasa, loyal to the YU Rosh Yeshiva, loyal to their psakim, loyal to the Rav, and everything that entails. That's one. I think even more importantly, because I think this is what comes up the most often, is when it comes to halacha. Because again, I can't imagine how painful it is for a parent, for a kid to come home and start making complaints and pikpukim about how you keep halacha and how you keep Shabbos. I'm not the biggest course of Talmid Chacham in the world. I'm sure it's going to happen to me when my kids get older, and I'm preparing for that knife. I'm sure it's really painful. But again, you could have two reactions to that. You can deny it, and you could say that's not what keeping Shabbos means, and it doesn't matter what it says in Shulchan Aruch, and this is newfangled, and that sends a message to your child. You're sending a message that our community is not a place in which we try to keep halachic ambition, and including things that you may have heard from your own teachers in our institutions. That's not a place where. So that's one message that you can send, or you can take a deep breath and make an extremely courageous decision, which takes a lot of strength, and say, this is a home in which we want to keep halacha to the highest of our capability. We want Ratzon Hashem to be the platform of everything that we do in this world. And we want our home to be better. And you know what? That's the reason why we send you to yeshiva. And this is important for me to know. We are going to go to our shul Rav, our rabbi from our shul, who knows our family and knows halacha and is a Talmid Chacham, and we're going to ask him what he thinks. That sends all of the right messages. You're showing a kid what it means to be somebody who strives for the highest level of Shmiras Halacha internal to our community. What it means to be somebody who cares about what it says in Shulchan Aruch. Even if I'm not perfect, we're working on it and we're getting there. And it shows the kid what it means, and especially the message of what it means when you send them to the Rav. First of all, half the time the kid's going to be wrong, more than half the time. I cannot tell you how many times a kid comes telling his parents that he's doing everything wrong, and the Rav will show him in Shulchan Aruch and Mishnah Berurah why what he's saying doesn't make any sense. And what happens if the kid's right? The Rav is able to sit down and say, so how are we going to deal with this situation? How are we going to make our homes a higher level of Shmiras Halacha? Do you have any idea how incredible that is for the kid to hear his shul Rav quoting Rav Shechter and Rav Willig and their psakim, and to help navigate his situation at home, and for the parents to be willing to listen to the Rav? That sends all the right messages. You're hitting it out of the park. That is an incredible lesson for your child about what it means to be a serious Eved Hashem who's a member of our community and loyal to our community and loyal to our Rosh Yeshiva and to our leaders. And I can't emphasize enough how far that will go in terms of encouraging your child to view your home as a destination for himself, even when he gets back from Eretz Yisrael.
That was very good and very practical advice specifically. I think that, looking at the leaders of who are in the modern Orthodox world is a very good starting point, because it's like obviously the things stem from the top and then they end up trickling down. And I also like the point that you mentioned of oftentimes you'll have a kid that comes home from yeshiva and they'll start telling your parents, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, and then they don't always know what they're talking about. Oftentimes they're probably wrong, but they think they're right. And then you go sit down with a real halachic authority. What do you say?
Guilty. I did that all the time. That was something that I've done, all my Talmidim have done. It's so common. Yeah.
Exactly, and so have I. And it's funny because people, as you were saying earlier before about the whole thing about why you macher. What does that actually mean? You're really just you're following Shulchan Aruch. Okay, maybe you could take a more chamor and strict opinion on specific things, but that's a whole nother conversation. But specifically to this point, a lot of students might come home and they tell their parents, "You're wrong about this. You're wrong about that." But really, al pi halacha, they might be taking a more strict stance, but they don't realize that. So I think it's a really good point. And I think that advice was very practical. And my next thing I want to lead into, which was, okay, we're discussing all these different things of what potential issues are, how we can improve, but even backtracking, right? Because what we're discussing right now is students in Israel, then when they come home from yeshiva and seminary, and now it's like, okay, I want to go all the way back to what happens before, because when people are in their own household, their parents obviously have a huge impact on what they take in. Hashkafali, what's going on in the home, what they give to their children, what they tell to their children. But at the end of the day, parents only have so much control as to what happens outside the confines of their own house. So my question specifically is, okay, if we have all these issues going on in the modern Orthodox community, then it might be coming from somewhere else. And that leads me into the topic of the school system. Do you think there's an issue with the way in which schools are doing things? And if so, basically, what should they be doing differently?
Yeah, one thing that's important to clarify in advance is something that my Rebbeim, Rav Reuven Schrier and Rav Torsky Shlita always put emphasis on this, is that ultimately you're the mechanech of your children. You are the ultimate tzura in their life of you're a teacher to your children. And we're not outsourcing chinuch by sending them to schools. And you should view yourself as the principal religious persona in your children's lives, and they should view you that way. This is something that I have to give myself mussar about all the time. You have to have a little bit of self-confidence with that, and you have to earn that title by being a spiritually ambitious person and a big person. But they always put emphasis on that. That being said, there's no denial. There's no way that we can claim that the schools don't have any influence, and this is just important to clarify again. The schools are working with the mitzvahs that they have. In many cases, the schools are having those conversations with the Rosh Yeshiva, trying to figure out what's the best way to navigate the situation. But I will give myself mussar, and I'm going to give my contemporaries mussar and my friends and the school system. They may not deserve the mussar, but I definitely deserve this mussar. I'll tell a personal story. Okay, when we were making Aliyah, my wife and I, we were deeply concerned about the fact that we felt that the Rav's hashkafa and his Talmidim's hashkafa doesn't really have a place in the Israeli scene. And it's a beautiful gem. It's a part of the mosaic of Klal Yisrael. It needs to be in the national homeland of Klal Yisrael. And it's something that was paining me a lot. And this is just important to clarify. It's a side tangent, but I need to say it. A lot of people would listen to me saying that and say, what are you talking about? Tilumi, and they assume, like Kipasuga, Gezerah Shava, it's the same thing. They are not the same thing. And in Eretz Yisrael, when you say Harav, you do not mean Rav Soloveitchik. You mean Rav Kook, Zatzal. Now, Rav Kook was a tremendous Talmid Chacham, and his Talmidim, Rav Tzvi Yehuda, obviously his son, Rav Yaakov Moshe Chalap, personally, his Torah influenced me so deeply. Their Torah is beautiful. They're a legitimate derech in Klal Yisrael. The Rav believed in different derechim in Klal Yisrael, and that's important to recognize. And I always tell my Talmidim, I don't have a monopoly on you. Your parents don't have a monopoly on you. If you want to head to Merkaz Rav and you want to lean into that Masorah, wonderful. Gesundheit, Matov U'Manayim, it's beautiful. But it's different, and nobody realizes that it's significantly different about many different things. Rav Tzvi used to joke that in America, I'm looked at askance over the fact that I'm too much of a Zionist. In Eretz Yisrael, I'm looked at askance from the rest of the Dati Lumi world that I'm not enough of a Zionist. And he was talking about what role does Medinas Yisrael play in your Yiddishkeit, and definitely in the Chardal world, in the Dati Lumi Torani world. There's a lot of emphasis on Medinas Yisrael as an ikr value, as an ikr pillar, and that's definitely not the way Rav Tzvi looked at it, and not the way the Rav looked at it. We can talk about that for a different time. Not for now. You should listen to a lot of shiurim on hashkafa and look at Rav Tzvi's writings and the Rav's writings, so specifically Chamesh Drashot. But the point is that the story I like to tell that captures this distinction is I was sitting in Shir in Gush with Rav Moshe Lechenstein Shlita, and he's obviously an Inikol of Rav Soloveitchik. He's his grandson, and we're learning Hakones, and he was describing the famous Gemara in which Rav and Shmuel are conversing with each other, and Shmuel refers to Rav as Abba. And the Aruch and many Rishonim say that Rav's real name was Abba, and he got the titular Rav because of his greatness. Rabbeinu HaKadosh, his Talmud, moved to Bavel. Because Rav was so great, he was given the titular Rav. And Rav Moshe says, Kamoha Rav Shalanu, like our Rav. And the Israeli sitting next to me looks up from his notebook and says, King, Harav Kuk. And looks back down and keeps writing. Awkward silence. It felt like 2 minutes. It was probably 15 seconds. But It was super awkward. Rav Soloveitchik was giving him a death stare. That was in Gush with Rav Aaron Luchenstein, still alive, with Rav Moshe, literally the grandson of the Rav, saying it, and the kid is Bashita, trying to say, no, not Harav Soloveitchik, Harav Kook. Tells you a lot about the distinctions over here, which the fact that people don't know and understand those distinctions shows a lot about nobody reads the Rav, nobody reads Rav Kook. They take like nice ideas that they get a smattering from and they put it together and they assume that that's all the same thing. But getting back to my main point, I was complaining about the fact that I felt like there was no place for the Rav's Masorah in Eretz Yisrael, and that was hurting me. And somebody I deeply respect, I don't have the permission to share his name, I would have to ask him, but he basically backhandedly gave me a lot of musar by saying, yeah, it really is a shame that nobody has actually read the Rav stuff and really doesn't know what the Rav or what his Masorah has to say about many things, and don't actually talk to the YU Rosh Yeshiva about those things. And I knew what he was saying. Yeah, big shot me. I read Lonely Man of Faith, Halachic Man, read 2 chapters of Vakashti Misham and then dropped it because it was too hard. Did I really have the derech? Do I really have it? As a mechanech, who took things really seriously. I loved Gush. I listened to all the sichot. I loved my Rebbeim and YU. I listened to all the Q&As. Rav Rosenzweig, I mamish, listened to every single word. But could I really crystallize the mahalach? Did I really learn how to apply it? Am I really trying to understand what this Masorah entails? And was I reading all the works of the Rav? And was I reading everything that the YU Rosh Yeshiva wrote on Torah Web and every single shir that they said? Or did I have a basic idea, a nice fuzzy idea? I'm going to be a broken telephone. I'm trying to give this over to the next generation, and I don't really have the derech down. I can't actually crystallize and clarify this mahalach. I had a lot to learn. I took that musar to heart, and I started reading a lot. I started listening a lot, and I like to think that I'm a moon reflecting my Rebbeim's light. Beyond, like Yoshua reflecting Moshe Rabbeinu's light, reflecting it beyond the walls of the Beis Medrash to a new generation, instead of being a broken telephone, trying to give it over in ways that I don't understand it. So I think we do deserve musar in the fact that we don't always study enough, we don't always listen enough, we don't always have conversations enough with our Rebbeim to really identify what is going on. And I think, to be mechazik, I needed that chizuk. I'm trying to offer it to my contemporaries and people I respect more than me, those who are above me. I needed the musar, and we really need to do a better job of crystallizing this musar and giving it over to the next generation. That being said, there is one thing that I think we should be doing practically. And again, I'm not trying to Rahman al point out any particular school, any particular community. I think it's a concept that we don't like to talk about enough, which is loyalty. The word loyalty is not really in our lexicon nowadays when it comes to Yiddishkeit. And it's really, really important. The only way to be a successful Yoshua is by being loyal. Yoshua engages with this world. He crosses over the Yarden. He builds a modern economy. He builds a military. He fights against the pernicious influences of the Canaanim. And the only reason why he's successful is because he's undyingly loyal to Moshe Rabbeinu, even though Moshe Rabbeinu was never zocheh to live in Eretz Yisrael. And that's extremely essential. What do I mean when it comes to loyalty? When I talk about loyalty, it's extremely important that we be very loyal. What do I mean by that? One of the things I appreciate most about our Masorah, about our Rebbeim, is nuance. Walking the derech hamamutza, walking a middle path, incorporating many different values and many different things, and being able to balance that appropriately and engaging with nuance. There are some communities that don't engage with nuance. Rav Shach Zatzal, tremendous Talmid Chacham. Rav Shach never publicly spoke with nuance. Privately he did, but publicly he never did, to the point where there are stories where he would privately tell somebody, look, start this institution, it's important for it to start, teaching somebody how to make a parnasa v'chulei, and I'm going to publicly come out against it. I don't know if those stories are true, but it shows a certain mahalach in which people can't be trusted with nuance. Our Rebbeim are trying to project a hashkafic view in which we are willing to engage in nuance. Now, Rav Rosenzweig Shlita has recently noted that is difficult, and one of our greatest weaknesses is that it is difficult to give over nuance, and that's where it's so important, ironically, to be even more loyal. More loyal. What do I mean by that? If you're not loyal and you're in the yeshiva shavelt and you're in a community which the value is Torah, even if you're not inspired and even if you're a lackluster Jew and you're not really keeping halacha, whatever, you're not going to reformulate your hashkafas olam. We're taking something that's tangential and making it into your idol, and that's what everything is about. With as much discussions as there's been in the yeshivish world about luxury and people being obsessed with money, it's a little difficult to make that into. People are still saying it's upsetting how obsessed we are with luxury and money. It's not going to become your value. Okay, I'm not talking about other communities. Let's talk about ourselves. The point is that in our community, because of our nuance, you can cut off pieces and run with it. You could reformulate the entire hashkafas olam by taking off a little piece and making it into the ikr. Let me just give a silly example of that, but something that I think is important. Rav Taragin Shlita, when he was going to YU, so Rav Taragin, this is my Rebbe from Yeshiva Har Tzion, so he shared with me that Rav Lichtenstein sat him down and was giving him guidance about how going to YU, and he said, Moshe, just remember, the Torah, the Rosh Yeshiva, the Beis Medrash, that's the meat of the sandwich. You're making yourself a sandwich. That's the meat. The secular classes, the mustard. Don't make yourself a nasty sandwich. It just gives over Rav Lichtenstein's mahal. This is Iker, Kiyem Chayin Avorech Amenu. This is what gives you your nutrition. This is what makes sure that you can survive and thrive. And the mustard is a spice. It brings out the flavor. It sharpens even the sandwich that you're consuming. And it's important, but not the Iker. And in many cases, I feel like people are taking the mustard and they're making the sandwich out of mustard. And Rahman Zan, it's not just that it tastes nasty, you're going to be malnutritioned. You're going to come out with a wacky product when that becomes the Iker. Just to give another silly example, somebody told me recently that at a Q&A with Rav Lichtenstein, broader yeshivas, it was like a get-together of many different yeshivas. So apparently somebody asked, look, I'm not necessarily going to college, and if you're going to Israeli college, you're not necessarily going to be learning literature and reading literature. He said, I want to read literature. What does Rebbe think I should do in terms of how I should approach it? Right now I'm in yeshiva. So Rav Lichtenstein smiled at him and said, well, if you finish Shas and Poskim well, I guess you can go ahead with reading Milton. I guess that makes sense. And I don't know if he said that tongue or cheek. If he said it seriously, then I'm totally guilty. I was reading Melville and Ibsen before I finished Shas and Poskim for sure, not even close. But whether it's tongue or cheek or whether it's serious, he was giving a very clear message there. Iker, Tafel, important, sharpens, gives us access to Torah, Rav Lichtenstein believed, allows us to apply Torah very effectively, but not the Iker of our lives. That's something that Rav Lichtenstein felt very, very strongly. And I still remember vividly sitting in a secular professor's class, a non-Jewish professor's class, and he was quoting Rav Lichtenstein's article about the value of secular literature, wonderful article, and there's a kid next to me who's shuckling to the Slavos, and he's saying it balpeh. This kid doesn't know the Yogim L'Ikari Emunah balpeh, he doesn't know Taryag Mitzvos, he doesn't know a Mishnah balpeh, he can't even say a word of Torah from Rav Lichtenstein, but he knows this article. That's mustard becoming the sandwich. That is where I'm not loyally trying to meet with my Rebbeim, speaking with them. That's where I view my Rebbeim as obstacles to what I want out of the Masorah, where I want my own agenda as opposed to sincerely trying to live the life that they are portraying and trying in my own unique way. Nobody's a robot here following everything. My Rebbeim don't believe that everybody has to be exactly the same in cookie cutter. But trying to loyally follow that Masorah and trying to make sure that Iker remains Iker and Tafel remains Tafel. So loyalty becomes even more important and more essential, specifically when it comes to our community because of the fact that we're engaging with nuance. And I think people could be more loyal. Just a good example of this, literally, it just happened recently, where Rav Schechter and Rav Reuven Schrier were interviewed by Rabbi Brandt. Rabbi Brandt was interviewing them, I think, about the out-of-town Kolo community experience. And it was wonderful. And a clip was taken out of what Rav Schechter said about the Asifa, the Tefillah Asifa that the Haredi world had here in Eretz Yisrael. And it was a 1 minute clip. It was taken around. It was sent everywhere. It became viral. And I got it from several people. I wasn't surprised at all. But Rav Schechter said, if you've actually had conversations with our Rebbeim and you actually listen to what they have to say, that wouldn't surprise you in the slightest. And Rav Torsky Shlita had already addressed this on the previous Thursday night in a 45-minute presentation, which I recommend everybody listen to. And wonderful. Everything Rav Schechter said, gold, and that's what his Talmidim always hear. Why was I so cynical? Because what we literally did is we literally cut out a minute and ignored the other 40 minutes of that presentation and what our Rebbeim said and what Rav Rosenzweig said right afterwards, which is that in order to make sure that our children and that our communities are able to give over these values to our children, we need community colon. We need people who are on fire, learning Torah, Yomam V'Layla, who believe in our values, who are halachically ambitious and spiritually on fire, and are so close with the Rosh Yeshiva and believe in the Rav's vision of what our community is supposed to look like, and still believe that making a parnasa is a lechatchila, and still believe in Medinas Yisrael, and believe in serving in Tzava, and that's something that we need in our community, so our kids can view that, again, as a tzura of what it means to be a member of our community. But no, we just take the minute that we like, and we cut it out, and we ignore everything else that the Rebbeim said. Rav Rosenzweig has been talking about this for 25, 30 years. He's been calling for this long before even the Lakewood paradigm became like such a big thing everywhere where you have these community kolim all over the place. And nobody listens. Because that's not something that we're interested in. We have our own agenda. And then we complain about the fact that our kids don't view our community as a destination when they're spiritually on fire. Maybe if we'd be a little more loyal, if we listened to our Rebbeim, we wouldn't have as many karbanos. Let me share one more story. I'm sorry I keep on going. Rav Tursky Shlita, another good example of this is where I heard a Silas Muslim from Rav Tursky, 2011. This is when I first got to YU. If I recall correctly, I think it was my first year in YU. And he spoke about internet. That was when smartphones and social media platforms were starting to become more and more of a thing, and the internet was, and everything that it entails. And he was speaking about it in his classic, very sophisticated and nuanced fashion. He didn't make any blanket no's. He didn't say, no, other communities did. No, blanket no's, we can never use it. And he was speaking it out. And I remember vividly at the very end, he said, and a Ben Torah has to ask himself, does he need it at all? That was the formulation. Does a Ben Torah even need it? It's a question that you have to ask yourself. And I remember walking away from that, there were a bunch of guys who got up and said, oh, Haredi, which such a narrow guy to refer to Rav Tursky that way, just in so many levels. But the point is that we weren't loyal. And because we weren't, we sacrificed karbanos in the process. If we would have listened to our communal leaders and if we would have listened to them that we should pump the brakes a little bit and slow down, we may have saved ourselves a lot of pain and agita later down the line. And we made fun of the yeshivish community that they said a blanket no and it's the future and it's going to happen anyway. And we were right. It was going to happen anyway. And they went to it much slower, much more conservative. And they saved a lot of pain and agita because they were more aware of the implications of what this was. And if we would have listened to Rav Tursky, we wouldn't have had to do that. Another story I like to tell that totally hooks into this is Moshe Tarragon again was on a plane and he's always been using technology from a young age. There's a story that he shared with us where he was sitting next to a Hasidic businessman on his right, and the Hasidic businessman saw that he was using his phone and he started asking him questions about it. And Rav Tarragon said, I started the conversation, I was the enlightened one, informing this barbarian about how to use technology, and we were going on about how to use it. And he started realizing as the conversation went on, this guy's planning on getting a phone for his business. He just wants to know how to use it properly. He saw that Rav Tarragon is Yireh Shamayim and a Talmid Chacham. So he wanted to ask, like, how do you do? What are your safeguards? And Rav Tarragon realized, and in his classic fashion, he said it so sharply. He said he realized by the end of the conversation, I wasn't the enlightened one. I was his guinea pig. It's a very, very sharp language. Guinea pig. A little more slower, testing out the waters, seeing what's the best way to use it and in what fashion to use it. And again, if we were a little more loyal, we would have saved ourselves that. And because we don't, and because we don't listen, and because we're not looking to really live the lives that our Rebbeim are portraying and painting for us, we pay the price.
That was a really good story with Rav Tarragon, and honestly one of my favorite. And there's a lot of things that you said there that I want to unpack, and then I have another follow-up for you. But if you go back, one of the first things that you said, which was obviously the importance of being loyal, and then you mentioned the story of Rav Shach, which I think is important for people to remember that, like, everyone obviously has their own perspective on nuance, but like you take Rav Shach, who literally said to somebody in private, "Hey, go open up this institution," and in public he came out against it because like that's his perspective. But it's important to keep in mind that like even in the Modern Orthodox world, what happens sometimes is those types of situations where a big Rav might come and say something in private, and then all of a sudden, somebody takes that answer that somebody got for their specific situation in their life, and then takes it completely out of context and then throws that around. Those things unfortunately happen. And obviously, as a question I asked you, which was about schools, like what could they potentially be doing differently? And I do hear your point of like being loyal, and obviously you got to look to the top. And then the final point I'm going to touch on, which was a great mashal. I think you said it was Rav Lichtenstein who gave it to Rav Tarragon about the mustard and the sandwich of like, you got to know what's important and what's not. And obviously you don't want to have a nasty sandwich. And therefore you got to fuel yourself with the things that are kihem chayin v'orchim. You're going to be filled with Torah. You're going to be filled with life. And those things will keep you going. And I think that, all those things you said were great. My follow-up to you is like, okay, now that we're talking about all these things that are they are issues within the Modern Orthodox community. And then we're talking about potential solutions. I think what's very important at this point in that conversation to highlight some of the things that are beautiful and are great about the community. And I know obviously this podcast is not about myself, and I am a product of TABC High School and Torah Shraga in Yerushalayim, and I come from these amazing, call it Modern Orthodox institutions, and I am who I am today because I come from this background. And I want to, kind of just really throw it to you because this is, you are the conversation here. But what would you say are some things at this point in the conversation that you would highlight about the Modern Orthodox community today that we really shouldn't lose, that are so beautiful?
I'm glad you're giving me this opportunity because I come off overly negative and I'm talking too negatively and I'm talking about perfection. And I don't do this enough to talk about what's so beautiful about our community and our values. Let me just tell a story that I think captures it for me. I've been saying this to my Talmidim. At the end of my Shlav Bet, so my kid was interviewing me in terms of which type of non-combat role I'd be interested in and what skills I have, which are none. But the point is, and what type of thing I could do. And he wants to know where he could place me. So this guy's great. I think Masorati. I don't think he's Shomer Halacha. I might be wrong about that. But a Geshmak Sephardi Yid, and really fantastic mefaked. Worked us far harder than everybody else in the Pluga, which I have complaints about. But he's really fantastic. So he sat me down and he started talking to me about what I would want to do. And in the conversation, he says, "Ata Ram b'yeshiva, you're a Ram in yeshiva. You give shir in yeshiva." I said, "Ken." He says, "Lama tapos yoter chashuv? Why are you here? That's more important. Why are you here with me?" And I just started laughing. It was so surreal that my mifaked in the army is giving me musar for joining the army. It was just a very ironic conversation. I laughed and I said, "The brain is more important than the liver, but you still die without a liver." That message of things can be more important, it doesn't mean you abandon everything else. That is something that our community excels at. That's where our Bayim, that's their nuance, that's their halachic ambition, that they're Tayag mitzvos, Ramach Evarim Shisal Gidim. There are all kinds of different elements to the Torah and has to apply itself. Yes, Kiyem Chayin Avorach Aminu, Talmud Torah is the nervous system of the entire guf. It keeps everything together. It's what creates the tzura of everything. And it is Yoter Chashuv. And it doesn't mean that we abandon everything else. And it doesn't mean that we ignore the fact, like I still want to keep my pinky, despite the fact that it's not as essential. And I'd like to, organ failure is an unpleasant experience for the entire body, despite the fact that this organ may not be as important as everything else. And that's something that my Rebbeim are so incredible at giving over, that balanced, nuanced path in terms of appreciating all of the Taryag mitzvahs and how Torah applies itself to the modern world and how to be engaged with society and still be absolutely undyingly loyal to the core principles of Torah, living with Torah in those circumstances. Why we believe in Medinas Yisrael, why we believe in Sava, and why we believe in serving in all those capacities. These are beautiful elements of our community, and our community has shown some of its truest, beautiful, most beautiful colors over the last 2 years in particular. And I think we should pat ourselves on the back. But I'm not so into patting ourselves on the back because I think that gives us an excuse to ignore things that we could work on. So I tend to be the type of person looking to the mirror more, but I should be a little more positive, and we should realize that we're doing an incredible job in certain areas, and that doesn't give us an excuse to give up. Lahafech. It's even the opposite. Adarabba. It's more of a reason to push and build and make our communities deeper and stronger so that our children can have these values going forward. And like I kept on emphasizing, if it means a little less sports, I think that's important. I think that we should be doing that. I joke, but if we're going to be listening to the Rosh Yeshiva in terms of the vision that they have for our community, and we're going to be loyal to them, that would involve changes in the current schools system and how they operate. The schools, in many cases, by the way, are already talking to the Rosh Yeshiva. They're just trying to work with the reality on the ground of how to get our Talmidim to closer to what the ideal vision is. And they're being held back sometimes by the parent body in terms of pushing that agenda forward. And I think we have to realize that if we want our kids to view our community as a destination, I think we should be loyal and listening to them. And if we would, our schools would look a little different. There'd be a lot more Talmud Torah going on. There'd be a lot more emphasis on Machshava and Yiras Shamayim and Avas Hashem. And I guarantee you that Spanish class would be gone because after 3 years of taking it, you still can't speak a word of it anyway. It's really not worth the time. And yeah, there'd be a serious secular education for sure, but maybe with a lot more of emphasis on Talmud Torah. I've had these conversations with them, and I know that that's what would be their ideal. And what would happen to sports in the process? I don't know, but are we really going to sacrifice our idyllic vision of what our community can look like and what the Rav had in mind for floor hockey, for an orange ball? It's not even a real sport. I don't get it. I don't understand why we be so obsessed and again interweaving our values with these types of things that we can't let go of it. I think we should honestly and bravely ask our manhigim and our leaders, so what should we do? And the parents need to be the ones who are pushing this agenda. It can't be the schools. That's what I was saying before. The schools are doing their best. The parents need to say, we don't want smartphones. Not just in school, we don't want smartphones. We don't want smartphones at home. School policy, nobody should have till the age of 18. Because that's what the research shows, and that's what's better for our children. The parents should be pushing the schools. And guess what? In many cases, you'll have a principal who is very interested in this conversation and is thrilled that you are the one who is reaching out to him or her to push this agenda across and start a revolution, moving our schools in the right direction. We want serious Talmud Torah. We want our kids to be proficient in Torah and Yiddishkeit when we leave. We want their heroes to be Rav Nachum Zemba. That's what we want. And we want the Rav to be a tzura in their lives. As opposed to the reality in which, and we need to say, like schools, like, let's do this. We are going to make our heroes into our children's heroes. And we're going to make our values into the core of who our children are by combining it, interweaving it with Yer Shemayim and Amkus and learning and Avas Hashem, instead of with the other stuff that we were talking about earlier.
That was really great. And I to really echo that point, it's a beautiful thing, I think, of our community is that, we're trying to find this balance of mixing those two worlds together. And honestly, it's you could take Chol and elevate it, you can elevate it in so many different ways, and it's being the most balanced Bentor you possibly can. And for those that are, floor hockey lovers, I'm sorry for what they just had to go through listening to what you said. But besides the point, all that was really great. And we're at the point right now where we're basically near the end of this episode, and this conversation has been awesome. And I'm going to throw my final question to you, which you could give me an answer based off of what you said today, but it could also be completely different. And that is, for anybody that's listening to this episode, at whatever stage they're at in life, if you had a message that was like, keep this message in a bottle with you and take it with you wherever you go for the rest of your life, what would that be?
It's like the broadest question ever, like impossible to apply to like the entire audience, but I'm going to cheat. I do have something to say that would apply to anybody, anywhere, at any time. And it's what I say to my Talmidim. A lot of times my Talmidim will ask, what's a successful Shana Aleph guy? What do you view as a successful Shana Aleph kid coming out of yeshiva? And I say that for me, a success is a kid who goes home, looks in the mirror, and every single day asks himself, what does a Kadosh Baruch Hu want from me? Every single major life decision and everything that he does, he's constantly thinking about, what does the Ribbono Shel Olam want from me? What is Ratzon Hashem? What can I uniquely accomplish on behalf of the Ribbono Shel Olam in my life with my skills and with my situation? That is a smashing success. There are so many ways of answering that question, so many different situations and so many different applications and so many different situations. It's impossible to simplify every single situation other than this underlying major yesod in which my life is being Oved Hashem. In my chinuch, that is the ultimate appellation, it's the ultimate title you can give somebody, is an Oved Hashem, an Eved Hashem. All he or she wants is to fulfill what a Kadosh Baruch Hu's Ratzon is. And that's why I can give everybody a bracha that they should succeed, Be'ez Hashem, in becoming Ovdei Hashem, becoming people who live for the Ratzon Hashem, and ultimately, Be'ez Hashem, to be able to give over our values to the next generation.
Amen. I'm taking that one with me, and that is my message in a bottle. And I can't believe we're at this point in the episode. And you know what? I'm just going to acknowledge it, because if somebody got this far in our episode, they need to know what went down to this episode. We tried to film this episode, I'm saying the first time, which was like a few weeks ago. We had some issues. Then we're like, okay, let's film it again. We filmed tonight. We're like, okay, Motzei Shabbos. We plan for 9 o'clock. We get on here at 10 p.m. We try filming. We go through a bunch of technical difficulties, this and that, ups and downs. It is currently, we went from Motzei Shabbos January 3rd when we started filming. It is currently Sunday, January 4th at 12:23 a.m. when we were filming this, and I always start off my episodes with Hakar Satov, and I'm finishing this one with insane Hakar Satov, and we could both acknowledge we are exhausted right now, but we're doing this because we believe in what we're doing, and I have a tremendous amount of Hakar Satov to you, because you have family, your kids are probably going to be up in the next few hours, and you're basically getting no sleep, and you have all your Talmidim. So just thank you so much for joining me. This was a phenomenal conversation, and if somebody got this far, they better come over to you in yeshiva and be like, Rebbe, thank you for staying up this late. And even if they're not in Mivaseret, send me a message. I'll forward it to Rabbi Schrier. And that's it. Thank you so much for joining me.
Technological incompetence. I really appreciate that. And sir, I'm sorry for keeping you up this late, but it's such an important topic. And it's discussed to be able to talk about it. So thank you so much.
Amazing. All the best.